The Great Steppe, millenniums of events, hundreds of nomadic tribes and people. They lived, worked, made discoveries, conquered large tracts of lands, and left us some mysteries. To learn more about it, watch the project called Enigma of the Great Steppe. The spring of 1936. Unexpected guests arrived at a distant village. Usually hospitable and open, the villagers were reluctant to welcome strangers. They watched the newcomers silently and tensely. The visitors knew for sure where they were heading to. They opened the canopy and entered the yurt, where a lean old man was sitting on a party-colored felt and played the dombra. Everyone had stood still, and only the akin didn't stop playing. Unexpected guests had nothing to do but to listen out to his song till the end. One of the guests nodded, and people standing in the yurt vanished into thin air. The interpreter sat next to the aksakal and started to explain something eagerly. The old man was listening with his eyes half closed. He was silent. The guests started to become nervous. They had a strict order to find and to bring the man. Finally, the old man nodded and stood up. He looked around his yurt as if he was saying goodbye, took his dombra and stepped outside. That was his step to a great fame and a step to an undeserved infamy.
Zhambyl Zhabaev – один из самых известных.
Zhambyl Zhabayev is one of the most famous and honored Kazakh national poets of the 20th century. The amount of glory and fame that he acquired in Soviet time cannot be compared to the glory of any of his contemporaries, poets, writers, and other representatives of a creative elite of Kazakhstan. He was loved and acknowledged by the authorities. It will take more than one episode to tell the life story of this man. His name was covered with myths and legends. So, who is he after all? Homer to Stalin, ideological fiction, or a talent nurtured by the people? Charismatic and photogenic but completely illiterate old man who had ghostwriters working for him, or a creator whose sincere verses made people laugh and cry? Are there any unequivocal answers to these questions? The truth is not always comfortable for everyone, and fabrications are always a source of hype for those who want to take the opportunity of great akin's name.
Вместо того, что вот так взять, покопаться, посмотреть, сравнить, нормально.
Some people tend to attribute some fantastic things to Zhambyl's personality, instead of doing proper research, reading things and looking them up.
Из разряда фантастики, например.
Some, for instance, say that he was so great, so charismatic that while he was in Stalin's office, he dared to push Stalin aside and started to perform Salah. I beg your pardon, but if this has happened for real, he would have been shot, and not just Zhambyl, but half of the people of Kazakhstan. Poet's works, his biography, legacy, and even his life as a whole are the source of heated debates. And it all has started in the mid of the 20th century. Some fervently argue that Zhambyl, that is how the poet's name is produced in Russian interpretation, was the greatest hoax of the Soviet ideology. The others claim that it was a native talent and genius.
В казахской степи всегда слово великого акына – это.
In the Kazakh steppe, the words of a great akin were more lawful than the words of a khan. To prove this, we don't need to look very far. The 18th century, for instance. If Bukhar Jirao said something, it could instantly invalidate Ablai Khan's words. And Ablai Khan was made a Khan with the efforts of Bukhar Jirao mostly. And that's why I don't agree with the idea that it was the Soviet regime that made Zhambyl great. He has always been great. Only Abai, his peer, can be compared to him. And that is how Zhambyl phenomenon is explained by Joseph Goldman in his film Zhambyl Forever. A team of Moscow journalists were assigned to find some more or less famous Kazakh singer in a remote village, meaning that anyone could take Zhambyl's place. The only thing that mattered was his popularity among common people. In modern literature, both philological and historical, there's a great desire expressed by people to say that it all was fake, that it was a fake personality who has never created anything, that all of his works were the product of collective efforts. But where did this task come from? The thing is that back then in the USSR, there was one singer of national outskirts, poet Ashik from Dagestan. In Literary Encyclopedia, published in 1939, the following is said: the cycle of songs about the leader of proletarian revolution written by Suleiman Stalsky is particularly remarkable. It was him who Maxim Gorky was called a Homer of the 20th century. But one Homer wasn't enough. More people were needed, people who could properly explain how great it is to live in the Soviet country. That was the reason Muscovites came to the steppe. According to Goldman, they didn't manage to find anything decent in the steppes. At that time, there wasn't a single genuine folk poet who was literate and gifted. They all were eliminated. Kazakh literature was completely bloodless, especially when lyric poetry was concerned. And the guys, as Goldman claims, decided to be cunning. They made up a poet, Mayim-bet, over one evening. In 1935, his poem called Song About Asan Kaigi, translated by Pavel Kuznetsov, was published in Kazakhstanskaya Pravda newspaper. Previously, there weren't any ideologically correct poems written by Kazakh authors. Later, the same newspaper has published Mayim-bet's second poem, Tale About Zhiruik. And who was the translator? Right, it was Pavel Kuznetsov again. The leaders were impressed. No one has ever doubted Akin's existence. The Kazakhs have two main traits. We are warriors and poets. Every second Kazakh man is a warrior and everyone likes a good poetry. It is our national trait. The mission was accomplished. And then a thunder struck. It was announced that in May of 1936, the first ever Decade of Kazakh Literature and Arts will be organized. The Soviet ideology was splendid. They paid us, the composers, great money to stimulate us to write laudatory cantatas. And because of that, the ideology has survived for 70 years. Zhambyl, Suleiman Stalsky, later Rasul Gamzatov, and others, my generation included, we were the pillars that supported the Soviet regime. The telegram from Levon Mirzoyan was sent from Moscow, commanding to find Akin Mayim-bet, dress him up properly and include the man into the Kazakh delegation, so that he could write a poem dedicated to Stalin. The ideological inquiry was extremely important. It was crucial to show that Kazakh people supported the Soviet regime unconditionally. But it was difficult to find this kind of support among people because of certain tragic historical events that happened prior to that. At that time, Kazakh culture couldn't produce people like that. Repression of the elites, collectivization. It was difficult to find Kazakh people who were genuinely happy with the Soviet regime. But it was essential. So the question arose, where to find Mayim-bet? Has he even existed at all? In his diary, composer Evgenia Brusilovsky wrote that Kuznetsov has encountered the great Akin at some way station between Akhtubinsk and Kizil Orda. The rumors had it that the poet was hiding from the regional committee secretary who wanted to send him to an asylum. This wasn't the first case. At some point, Bais, who hated famous singer Birjan Sal, declared him insane and chained him. But Mayim-bet was not found in Kizil-Orda mental hospital. There was no time to investigate his whereabouts. Another authoritative Kazakh Akin was needed urgently. So at one of the meetings, someone has said, "You know, there is an old man who lives not so far away from here, in Kastek. He is a good Akin. very popular in the area. Although he is more than 80, he goes to bazaars very actively. His name is Zhambyl. And it is still unknown who was the man that discovered Zhambyl. Was it Pavel Kuznetsov, Andrei Aldan Semyonov, or some local party member?
Это все связано с тем фактом, что Zhambyl, конечно,
It is all about Zhambyl being a legendary personality.
вся его жизнь
All his life was dedicated to Kazakh culture.
на казахской культуре.
It is important to understand that he was Kazakh speaking. He barely knew Russian. He was illiterate.
Язык, и он был неграмотный. Вот. И вместе с
And that's why his biography is a complete folklore.
описание это фольклор.
According to Mr. Goldman, Zhambyl was discovered completely by chance when a group of journalists was driving by his village and heard a lingering melody. They approached the village and saw a lonely shepherd holding the dombra. The old man was incredibly charismatic and the singing was charming. They have washed him, dressed him up, and brought the old man straight to Moscow. And that is not merely a fabrication, not even a scoop. It is an outright mockery and pure falsification.
Дело в том, что Zhambyl, он был
The thing is that Zhambyl was great way before the Soviet regime.
в 1921
In 1921, when Oraz Jandosov has gathered the first rally of Kazakh Akins,
со всего Казахстана
many famous Akins have showed up from all over the country.
акины. Вот, кстати, тот же самый Шашубай,
Shashubai, Nurila Akin, Young Kinin, all of them, Shukutai, they all have gathered. Almaty, then Verny, has hosted this big rally of Akins. And of course, as it was Akin rally, the first ITIS competitions took place.
знаменитые вот эти айтисные состязания.
Moreover, long before the revolution, Zhambyl was welcomed in the homes of the elites of the steppe. Luckily, incontrovertible proofs were preserved in Kazakh Central State Photo, Film and Sound Recordings Archive.
Ранняя фотография по Zhambyl Zhabaev
Zhambyl Zhabayev's early photographs are dated back to 1913. This photo was made by Pavel Lebin. He was one of the founders of photography in Verny.
фотографии Берном. Посвящена это
The pictures were dedicated to the 300th anniversary of Romanov dynasty. The photograph features Akins. In the center of the picture, there is Zhambyl with dombra.
в эту пору в Берном был
Back then, Verny's governor was Folbaum, Mikhail Folbaum,
Михаил Фольбаум, и по велению его
and the event was organized by his order, and only the most prominent Akins were attending, including Zhambyl.
Акинов, и в том числе
He who has never been poor at all.
вообще не был бедным человеком.
As it turns out, a steppe Homer was not a miserable shepherd. He was a famous Akin, the winner of many ITIS competitions, follower of talented Suyunbai.
Сказать, что Zhambyl,
So we can't say that Zhambyl appeared suddenly, out of thin air.
он тоже, конечно,
Of course, geniuses like him are born once in 100 years. However, he didn't appear just out of nowhere.
на месте. Он сам говорил, что у него два кумира.
His biggest idol was, of course, Suyunbai.
Это, конечно, Сюмбай. Вот он
So he was sort of Suyunbai's disciple.
как бы учеником был Сюмбай.
According to the legend, when Akin was dying, he decided to leave his dombra to his compatriot Zhambyl because he had a kind heart, beautiful soul, and he valued honesty.
Другим кумиром его, вот,
His another idol in the world of music was Daurin Sal Kudaibai Uli.
этих своих кумиров.
Zhambyl grew absorbing melodies of his idols. He was saying that in order to become a good poet and Akin, one has to know by heart more than 10,000 verses.
Тысяч чужих строк.
And here is another myth busted, the myth about an illiterate old man dressed in a greasy robe. Yes, Zhambyl couldn't write or read, but he had a unique memory. Balnur Kidirbek says that poems were his very own element.
Мой отец, Болгабек Кадырбек Улы,
My father, Balgabek Kidirbek Uli, a writer and journalist, was lucky to meet Zhambyl in 1939.
в 1939 году.
My dad was telling us that he was amazed by the fact that Zhambyl has never spoken in prose. Like, for instance, he was saying, "Fetch me some tea, sit next to me, who are you?" And all of these he would say in verse only. He has never spoken a single word of prose. But that wasn't the only thing that bemused the 9-year-old. He was surprised by the fact that the Akin was wrapped up warm despite the July heat. But after all, Zhambyl was over 80. However, he has always been a welcome guest at any toy, before the revolution and after it.
Следующая фотография относится к 1927.
The next photo is dated back to 1927. Here we see Zhambyl with his fellow villagers.
И
Who took the picture still remains unknown. The next photo was taken in 1930. Here Zhambyl Zhabaev performs in front of Turksib builders. So why this whole story about a miserable old man was made up one of the biggest Zhambyl-related myths? The answer to this is ideology. It was a way of saying that only after the revolution, poets of the outskirts were able to create their works. That is why information like this has appeared in Zhambyl's biography. My father, Jibek, was a poor Kazakh nomad who had nothing in his possession but an old torn chapan. It was the only way to survive in the country of victorious socialism. In the Soviet era, Kazakh famous figures, artists, party members, and public servants tried to conceal their real origins, editing their family history. That is why most of them were saying that they were coming from poor families. It was a cliché needed for prosperous political career and promotion. On the 7th of May, 1936, the Pravda published Tolgao, called My Motherland, written by a new Kazakh poet. It was a tremendous success. The critics were writing about fresh images, national style, and lush metaphors combined with political matureness. Sing, my dombra, in the villages. Listen, people, to the songs of Zhambyl. Listen, kastiek, kaskile, karakon, my glorious song about a great Soviet law. The law by which the joy comes, the law by which the steppe becomes fertile, the law by which the heart sings, the law by which the youth flourishes, the law by which the nature serves, to the glory and honor of all working people. It is easy for us to judge these people, those who are glorifying Stalin, Izhov, and Beria, but all were needed to understand the context of the era they were living in. It wasn't just Zhambyl Zhabayev who was glorifying Stalin. Anna Akhmatova did this too. Maximilian Voloshin did. Everyone did. But to our contemporaries, our new generation, I want to say that you need to understand what it was to live and work in that country. You need to understand that it was a prison, a maximum security prison. On the 10th of May, Moscow has welcomed guests from Kazakhstan. Among the visitors was Kulyash Baisitova, Saken Sifulin, Ilyas Jangsugurov, and young students of Almaty Choreography School. But the most prominent guest was an old man with dombra. Days of brotherly republic went great. The audience thanked artists, singers, and poets with standing ovations. However, there was another side of the coin. There was an ongoing preparation for another decade of Kazakh literature in Moscow. Fellow translators were quick to get hold onto new editions that were prepared in a great hurry. Word-for-word translations were made. They were rhymed by the people who have never previously read or seen a word of Kazakh poetry. And in this hurry, manuscripts were sent to the printer. Alexander Zhovtis, a writer and translator who was evacuated to Kazakhstan during war, has evaluated the situation in a harsh and unpleasant way. But everyone sees what he wants to see. Regarding Zhambyl's opponents, I'm 100% sure that they have read this nonsense and haven't read any original sources. They probably don't even know Kazakh, not to mention reading Zhambyl's works in Kazakh. And there are archives as well, unique film reels. It can't be retouched or doctored for the sake of someone.
Есть интересные фотографии у нас.
There are some interesting photographs that we have in our archives. Zhambyl, after the decade of literature and arts, meeting the writers.
И он всегда в центре.
And in the pictures, he is always in the center. And next to him are Mukhtar Awezov, Yuri Dombrovsky, Tahir Zharokov, Abdilda Tajibayev.
И у лица
And the faces of the people standing next to Zhambyl are animated and amused.
и заинтересованные.
Thus, in the spring of 1936, the Akin of New Soviet steppe has appeared. No one was surprised by his age, illiteracy, or lack of knowledge of Russian.
Zhambyl появляется на такой культурной политической арене Казахстана
Zhambyl has appeared on cultural and poetic arena of Kazakhstan all of a sudden.
со второй половины.
He was reborn from the second half of the 30s, starting in 1934, and especially in 1936.
Начинается просто лавинообразный,
He has produced a number of works dedicated to relevant political topics.
на актуальные политические темы.
Zhambyl's poems are imbued with patriotism and pathos. The very genre of his works was drawing readers' attention with its colorful descriptions, courageous comparisons, and majestic vibes. Let Sunny Stalin, the chosen one, to further lead our big caravan to the places where dreams of generations are merged, to the Jailao of centuries, the communist world. It was a genuine triumph. The poet's works were published regularly. Meetings, congresses, rallies, celebrations, party plenums. Zhambyl has always performed there. Stalin has brought my youth back to life. I am 100-year-old, and I forgot about my old age. No more gray hair, no more fatigue. Stalin is an immortal victory banner. But there were other poems about steppe, people, and war. They're more moving and vivid. My children, the Leningraders. My pride, the Leningraders. Your grandfathers are remembered by Zhambyl. He remembers your grandfathers. They were exiled to his aul, and he has heard their chains ring. In ancient Greece, 7 cities were arguing over Homer, people of the great Soviet Union who would have fought for Zhambyl with a great passion. Having survived his only son, Al-Gadai, who died at war, Zhambyl was gone when he was almost 100 years old. The people mourned their Akin, and it was for real.
Показывали
I remember watching the video of Zhambyl's funerals. The clip was 10 minutes long. I had an impression that all Almaty residents thought that it was necessary to attend the funerals and say farewell to Zhambyl.
с Джамбулом.
Очень много свидетельств такой вот.
There were many testimonies. One was even Shostakovich's anonymous testimony, where he's not naming anyone, but it is clear who he was talking about.
О том, что Zhambyl Zhabaev
And he was saying that Zhambyl Zhabaev was a man-made phenomenon, the result of Kazakh functionaries' efforts of Zhurgenev, Kazakh poets and translators.
поэтов и переводчиков.
By the way, this testimony of a famous composer, Dmitry Shostakovich, is considered as a hoax, written by a writer, Solomon Volkov. There were other poets apart from Kalkaman Abdukadyrov, Tahir Zharokov, Abdilda Tajibayev, and Gali Ormanov. However, no one could ever reproduce Zhambyl's style. Why is that? If according to denunciators, it was so easy? In 1954, at the Congress of the Writers of Kazakhstan, Pantelimon Ponomarenko has answered these questions. Pantelimon Ponomarenko said that poets like Zhambyl Zhabayev do not exist anymore, nor do poems like his exist. So what is the truth and what is the lies? Authors and historians were debating about this for many years, but poems and verses written by Zhambyl still live. And they don't need either defense or judgment. They need readers, smart, attentive, sensitive readers that are able to see through this ideological husk and notice a bright star of the poet of the great steppe. Abai and Zhambyl are supposed to be understood. Abai and Zhambyl are both incredible personalities who represented Kazakh people. It was through them that the whole world learned about our nation, and some unconsidered words that were said about them are merely a big misunderstanding. It is an equivalent of discrediting yourself, your own people, your language.